I wanted to go over paragraph 6C of the 1 to 4 family residential contract by TREC. So this is what I see agents get wrong all the time. I just think that it's a lot of abstract thinking here, maybe, but a lot of times agents just don't get this right. So one, the survey has to be done by a registered professional land surveyor, and it has to be acceptable to the title company and the buyer's lender. Both the buyer's lender and the title company will never specifically require a survey, but the buyer's lender will want an endorsement on the title policy, and then the lender will need the survey for that endorsement. And at that point, then the survey boundary lines and all that come into effect. And especially too, if they want these amendments to read shortages in area, again, they're going to need this survey. But 6C is going to determine how the survey comes into play and who provides it. So 6C1, this is saying that the seller will deliver an existing survey to the title company along with the T47 affidavit within X amount of days. So this is always, this is a negotiated date. I typically, as personal policy, I try and keep this within the termination option period. So if I put a 7-day termination option period, I'm probably going to have this between 3 and 5 days. An excessive one would be anything over like 10 days. If they have a survey, they should be able to produce it pretty quickly. So really 3 to 5 days, I would think would be a reasonable consideration. Then the T47 affidavit, that's where the seller is going to say, per the date on the survey. So a lot of times people will use today's date for that affidavit, but the date on the affidavit should be the date on the survey, the date that was generated. And then they're just letting title know that if they've made any changes to the improvements on there. So physical changes to the property, being maybe fences, or maybe they added a swimming pool or filled in a swimming pool. Maybe they added a shed or a barn, all kinds of things like that. I think permanent structure, things that are in the ground. So those things would need to be there. Sometimes title, to accept these changes, they may ask the seller to just physically draw an image of where the new barn is or something like that, right? But they have that amount of time to deliver that survey and the T47. If they do not deliver it in that time period, then the buyer shall obtain a new survey at the seller's expense no later than 3 days prior to closing. If the seller fails to furnish within the timeline, then the existing survey or the affidavit, if the title company or buyer's lender does not accept the existing survey or the affidavit declaration, then buyer shall obtain a new survey at seller or buyer's expense no later than 3 days. So here's the way to look at it, that this date right here is the amount of time that the seller has to provide the survey and the T47. So if they just send the survey, that's not good enough. They need that T47 as well. If they don't do it, then the buyer just buys a new survey and it charges the seller. And if they do deliver it and then title kicks it back and they're like, hey, this isn't good enough, maybe they don't like the drawing, or the underwriter kicks it back and says, we need something a little more firm. Or even that the lender looks at it and maybe there's some encroachments, or maybe the survey is too blurry and they can't read the field notes. These would all be things that would generate having to purchase a new survey. And right here, we would say who is buying that new survey. All right, so again, we're only using 6C1. If you're on the listing side, you're only using it if you have an existing survey. And then if you're on the buy side, it's probably a good idea to just check this one and go through with it that way. Because then if the seller doesn't have a survey, then you automatically get a new one. 2 would be if the buyer is going to obtain a new survey, and 3 is going to be if the seller is going to obtain a new survey. So it does add a little more language here in 2. So a buyer may obtain a new survey at the buyer's expense. Buyer is deemed to receive the survey on the date of actual receipt or the date specified in this paragraph, whichever is earlier. If buyer fails to obtain a new survey, buyer may not terminate this contract under 2B of the third party financing addendum. So it's saying that, paragraph 2B of the third party financing addendum gives some extra reasons that a buyer can terminate. But not having the survey that they agreed to purchase, not having that in time, is not one of those reasons. The third one is just that the seller is going to purchase it at their own expense. So some things to consider in here, like I'll see some crazy dates in here. Sometimes I'll see like 3 days or 5 days. Just, this has to get scheduled with the survey company. Then they actually have to physically go to the property, and then they have to go with county records. And there's a lot of work to do. It's just 3 days is just an unrealistic time period. I would think like 14 days is a fast time period, 10 to 14 days. The majority of them probably going to be 14 to 21 days, or even 30 days is good. Things to consider: if it's a bigger property, it's going to take a little bit more time for the title company. Or even if it's maybe not a bigger property, but it's got some floodplain in it, or maybe it's on some hills or some thick forests, things like that would make it difficult for the surveyor, like it's a arduous journey to go around this property. These are going to take more time versus like a lot and block home that maybe it's just a square, 60 by 40 lot or 60 by 80 lot, where they're just going in and just, doing a quick survey. It's pretty easy for that. But those are all things to consider on here. So just going back through again, paragraph 6C1 is going to be the most commonly used one. If you're a buyer, you're just going to automatically check this, and unless you know specifically the seller doesn't have a survey, if that's been put in MLS or you've been told that. And then if you're a listing agent, you don't want to accept it with this one unless you actually have that survey in hand. And even a T47, this is something that I would do even ahead of putting the property on the market, so I'm prepared for this. But 6C1 is going to say the seller needs to deliver the survey and the T47 that's completed within the negotiated timeline here. If the seller does not deliver it, the buyer can purchase a new survey at the seller's expense. If the survey is rejected for some reason by either the lender or the title company, then this is where we would determine who's going to purchase a new one. 6C2 is going to be the buyer is purchasing a brand new survey, and the buyer does not have the ability to terminate paragraph 2B if they forget or they just don't order that survey. And then 6C3 is going to be the seller purchasing a new survey prior to closing.